Welcome back to the Labor Forum. You are tuned into WRFG 89.3 FM, your station for progressive information. This is the program that talks about worker issues, all kinds, because everything that happens is a worker issue to us here at WRFG. And our two guests today are long experienced teachers, educators, and very much involved in the DeKalb County school system. And we invited them because there is going to be a press conference tomorrow on this Opportunity School District ballot. That'll be on the, when you go to vote this coming November. And this is a topic about which, although we've had multiple other programs, there's just never enough information that can be given to the public because this whole issue has just been, it's so much smoke and mirrors. It's so
complicated.
Well, I think it's been so misrepresented. I think that's the main thing, and I'll start with the name, Opportunity School District.
It's a misnomer.
But anyway, so friends who are listening and those that are watching, you see on their computer screen, Gloria Slaughter, and she is a retired teacher. And she was a many-year member of the board of WRFG, longtime activist here in the city. Seated next to her is Susan McWethy, also a longtime educator, librarian. And both of them are active in the whole issue of quality public education, and we are so happy that they're here at the program today. So, you want to start, Paul?
Well, I guess the best place to start is what is the Opportunity School District and why is that a misnomer?
Well, I'll start. In 2015, the Georgia legislature voted to create a state-run school district, and that would operate up to 100 public elementary and secondary schools that have been deemed to be failing. And so that means that no longer would the democratically elected school boards control those school districts or particular schools within those districts, but rather it would be a state-run system.
And can you explain what is the process voters are coming into? What is this about an amendment to the Constitution?
May I read the amendment so
Sure.
that you can see what a misnomer it is? The following initiative will be on the ballot. Shall the Constitution of Georgia be amended to allow the state to intervene in chronically failing public schools in order to improve student performance? Now, who cannot agree with that?
Well,
That's
who
the
cannot
problem.
agree with wanting failing schools to be improved?
Improved, yes.
The catch here is the state.
Right.
And why an
Right.
amendment?
Right. Well, it's an amendment because it's not allowed currently under the current Georgia Constitution. Since 1945, it has not been allowed for any new independent school districts to be formed. So voters will have a chance to vote on this, because we have to go through the whole process of amending the Constitution. And voters will vote in November, yes or no, on this amendment.
So let's get into, though, what it means for a so-called failing school, because one, what are the criteria for a failing school? That's one thing. Who decides what's failing? And two, what would it mean when this school is taken over? How does it get taken over?
Well, I'm going to back up a little bit and try to answer your question, but also I'm finding it very ironic that in the last decade, the governor and the state legislature has reduced the education funding $8 billion or more. And then all of a sudden, we're supposed to improve these schools. And some of the schools in rural Georgia, instead of having 180 days due to the reduction of the budget, only held their doors open 140 days. So this is not a quality education. And it did not improve education. And now the governor says he wants to improve education, but look what's been done. and how can this improve education? It doesn't talk about improving, it talks about shutting down. And that's, I think, is the whole intent of the Opportunity School District proposal, is to create charter schools out of the public schools.
Susan, maybe you could go ahead and explain what that is. There's so much publicity here in Atlanta as well, you know, there's now this turnaround plan, which also is all about privatizing schools. And people may not understand what it means when a private management company, whether for-profit or so supposedly not-for-profit, takes over a school. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah. Well, I think most of us know how public schools operate. I think most of us 93% of us are probably in this room are graduates of public school systems. And that means that public money is allocated on a per pupil basis for the operation of the schools. And then we have, the people can vote to improve on buildings and what have you. But what's happened over the last few decades is people wanting to make profit off of that system have come in and tried to impose their market-based ideas on what was once a strictly publicly operated system. So they're doing that in the form of charter schools is one of the ways that they're accomplishing that. And what it does is it takes some of that money that's allocated for each pupil and it goes instead to a charter operator. And so it's actually a way of transferring money from the public into the private sector.
Well, the question I had, Gloria, is just a follow-up on what you said, because it sounds to me like this is a formula that we've seen at Grady, I've seen at MARTA. You deprive a public system of the resources they need to operate, which drives it into crisis, which sets up the need to privatize, because what else can we do? Is that how it works?
Yes, I think so. I think that's absolutely how it works. And I think we also have to look at the electronics age. Robots are displacing workers. And so I really think that the capitalists are thinking we don't really need educated workers anymore. And there
Or
are
just a
some,
certain number of them.
right, just there are some high-tech jobs still available, but most jobs will probably be replaced by robots, and then we have to look at that. So I think we have to look at education being a different way of thinking, a different process. That education should be something that it's a liberal education, it's an education for life. I think we still have to discuss that question of what education really should be if robots are going to take some of these jobs that are out there.
So do you want to come on?
I wanted to say something about the funding also. As you were saying, Paul, that has been a plan, is to undermine public education. So then, oh my goodness, we have to come in now, we have to take it over because it can't survive on its own. And they do that by, of course, the underfunding, but also they've changed the whole narrative about schools. They've decreased people's confidence in schools to do a good job. And it just creates it's a whole setup that's to take them over. And if you rate a school, A through F, which answers your question of earlier, how are these going to take place? The state will decide how they determine it, which schools will be eligible or not, but they're going to get a grade. And as if school was so simple, that you could reduce each, building into a letter grade. It's absurd.
Well, the thing that it strikes me so much about this is particularly the fact that this is kind of a national push. This isn't something just unique to Georgia. And in fact that there are major right-wing forces, and we mentioned the Koch brothers and the Koch money and the Koch Foundation and the Koch Industries influence on this organization called ALEC. And I read just before I came over here that just this past year, there was something like 142, 152 pieces of legislation introduced in states across the country with this similar kind of idea that public schools and the ability of a community, parents and others in the community to vote for a school board, and that the children, you know, kind of get an education based on that community's wishes and needs, that's all being kind of flushed down the drain, and saying, no, the way to go is what you call very market-driven, and that you can quantify everything by tests. Children are successful if they can pass a certain test, and if they can't pass this test, then they're failing.
Then it's the teacher's fault.
Yeah.
Don't forget, everything is the teacher's fault now too, because they found an easy scapegoat in teachers. And so then they've come up with schemes like merit pay, you know, as if teachers are creating widgets or something, you know, and that's not how it is. It's a lot more complex than that. And they're dealing with children, and they're, we all know, when these things are discussed, what they leave out so much is what is really causing the failure in our schools, and it's not the schools themselves, it's the context of the children's lives, it's the poverty, it's their, you know, and poverty leads to bad health, it leads to, their vocabulary development is poor, their life experiences are not as enriched as other children's. And these are factors that have a huge bearing on how well they do in school.
But the point is that just like that, the idea is that these kids should go to prison. I mean, they
Right.
put them in what's called the school to prison pipeline.
Yeah.
So that if they can't pass that test at 3rd grade, that's what their future is.
And that's how some of these charter schools are operating, with very draconian rules and very straightforward, you know, 1, 2, 3, you're out. And it's not a good, it's just not a good atmosphere for learning.
Can we talk about New Orleans, for example, for an example of what we would have to look forward to in terms of a scenario?
That's the worst of the worst.
Well, the only thing I know about New Orleans is all the schools were made into charter schools, and then there was no improvement in, you know, in some of the children's education. Plus, they used inexperienced teachers. You know, they wanted to pay the least amount of salaries, so they went for Teach for America candidates and so forth. So I think Michigan, Tennessee, some of the other states, I think Diane mentioned, other states that have gone through this kind of reform.
I call it a deform myself.
Yeah,
okay. Yeah,
It's an absolute
yeah.
deform
Well,
of
and-
public education.
Right, and it also reminds me of Flint, Michigan, and what's going on there now. You know, all of this is controlled by the top, and you know, so the governor in Flint, Michigan, and the EPA and other officials
The emergency manager.
decided, yeah,
A
well,
person that
the people
replaced
did
the
not want
Democratic.
the emergency manager, but that went away, and they got the emergency manager, and then all of a sudden, the water was coming through corroded pipes, and the children have blood disease now that most of them will live with the rest of their lives.
And
so
another
it's
thing
an
about
example.
Michigan, they have their own, theirs is called something else. They all have their nice euphemistic names for them. But they actually used the students there as guinea pigs to test out some educational software. And the teachers were complaining that it didn't work, and they were using that as a way to hire fewer teachers. And so that was a complete disaster, and there's some children lost, you know, a year or two of learning there.
Let me ask you some more specifics. When people see this on the ballot, they are not going to know certain things. For example, the governor will hire this superintendent of this special statewide school district. Apparently no qualifications are needed other than
Right.
maybe that he's a buddy. Now, what are all the things that single person can do it's outlined in the legislation, but not on ballot.
Well, yeah, I think it, yes. Well, yes, the governor determines the salary and job qualifications for the people who work in the Opportunity School District. But the governor also would have the power to fire principals, transfer teachers, students around, shut down schools, create charter schools. And schools that are taken over lose all power. And they also lose their money because that's how it gets funded. So the funds that were appropriated for those schools end up going to the Opportunity School District. So those schools have to accept the total authority of the governor or the governor's superintendent.
And what happens to the teachers that are in the schools now?
They have to reapply.
Just
for
like in
a job.
Atlanta, what we're hearing is
Yes.
300 teachers have to reapply.
That's
for a
right,
job.
yeah.
And now not be part of the teacher's pension program.
Right.
And be offered way less wages and
Right.
salaries and benefits.
Yeah, traditionally charters do not pay as well. And
I'd like to mention one more thing. In this Opportunity School District, there are no vocational education courses offered. And the local districts will have to pay for special education needs. So, it's not an opportunity for all students. In fact, you almost might say it's an opportunity for those who are college-oriented, but, the others will fall by the wayside. And Georgia, Nevada, and Michigan, I think, I've got to look at my notes, have the highest dropout rate already. So, what's going to happen to the students?
Now, other charters sort of can cherry pick students. Is that the way these OSD schools will be too? They won't have to absolutely accept everybody?
I think they're gonna, we don't know.
No.
In fact, I meant to say that earlier. There's a lot that's unclear about this. The enabling legislation left out a lot. So we're speculating on a lot of this.
Yeah.
My assumption is that they will have to take every student that's in those schools that they take over. It doesn't mean they have to keep them, because, charter schools are able, if they're privately operated charter schools, they are able to pick and choose, well,
They can
in this
expel.
case, expel,
Right.
yeah,
Any
exactly.
discipline problems,
Right.
they'll expel.
And students that they can't educate because of special needs or something else.
One question we've asked, we've had many people on, because as we say, for the most part, the media does not explain this at all. And if it does anything, it sort of repeats this very,
Yeah.
I don't know, describe it, this very kind of utopian kind of
Right.
thing that if we just vote yes, then somehow all the problems in the
All the
schools are gonna
children
go
will be
away.
smart.
Yeah. So if you two had the opportunity to really help determine Georgia's educational policy, or even DeKalb counties, or, wherever, what is it that you would emphasize? As people who have been in the classroom and have been dealing with students, the majority of your adult life, how is it that you would you still have metal detectors and armed police? Would you still, would you?
I haven't, I've been retired 14 years. But I look back at why I decided to retire in 2002. DeKalb County, I guess I better go ahead and say it, DeKalb County came out with America's Choice, which was a very rigid teaching
Corporate.
tool. The teacher had to stand in front of the class and read a script. And if the supervisor or superintendent or principal came in your room, you had to be on the page they said you were to be on. And I taught second grade. How in the world they thought I was going to stay on task with little children who, just wiggle, they change the subject, and that was just no fun for me. when I was teaching, I loved to have drama, have the stage in the front of the class, and the little children would teach sometimes, and things like that. And, by them teaching, they learned the course too, they had to prepare. Things like that that I really enjoyed, and so some of these programs don't make it fun for teachers.
And
the
they don't
high
make it
stakes-
interesting for kids.
Right, that's what I was just going to say,
Boring.
high stake, yes. And then you wonder why there's more discipline problems because of this. A lot of the times now classes are preparing for tests, and that's just not fun.
I want to say something in DeKalb County's defense, because probably most people have an idea what Atlanta Public Schools have been going through lately, which is very corporate, very privatized, kind of on a path to privatization and using outside outsourcing approaches. Dr. Stephen Green is the new superintendent of DeKalb County Schools, and I like what he said, and if I can quote him here, he said, "No outside agency, governmental or otherwise, can provide the care, nurturing, and emotional support needed to inspire our students to higher achievements. Only student relationships with superb teachers and principals can do that. We see these relationships, this foundation, already firmly established in our most challenged schools. We now will build on that foundation." So
Beautiful,
I have a
yes.
lot of hope for this new
Yes.
superintendent. I think he's spot on with that.
Good,
So,
good, that's great.
So Susan, if I could repeat my question, if you were
Right.
the person who had a major influence, what's the single most thing you would change? You're a librarian.
Yes, I was just thinking of that. I think that what needs to happen is that teachers need to teach less. They have marathon teaching days. Most teachers teach about 5 classes a day. That's more than any other OECD country except Chile and Argentina. And we teach about 400 more hours per year than the average of teachers overseas. And that's just too much. And so they don't have time for proper sustained professional learning. They don't have time to smell the roses and collaborate with each other. I think that's the most important issue. You never hear about it ever anywhere. This is the only place you'll learn about this. But I think that's the problem. And teachers are so stressed. I would like to see classes come into the library much more often than they do. And I work in a school where the library is a very important part of the instructional program, but I think it should still be more.
Well, one of the things, I've had friends who are teachers, and they take home tons of papers to grade at night. Then they're being asked to do all this extracurricular
Right.
stuff. They're supposed to be, the person with a club. They're supposed to go to all
Yes.
the games. They're supposed to, and then they come into their class and they've got a child who hasn't had anything to eat, or a kid
Mhm.
whose clothes are dirty and his shoes are torn off, ripped up, or has bruises. I mean, really, seriously, how are you supposed to stay with that program that you described, Gloria, when you have children who really are so fragile?
Yeah.
And I don't describe this just to, what they describe as urban schools. The suburban schools,
Yeah.
that rural schools. All the children are facing extraordinary
Yeah.
issues.
Yeah. Well, you can't continue with the rigid curriculum that a lot of the schools have now. You've got to have, like you were saying, fun in the classroom.
Teaching
And
moments.
teachable moments, and treat every child, as a great
Special
potential.
human being.
Yes, a great potential for the future. Maybe one of our leaders. You never know who you're teaching and how they're going to bloom. But the classroom should be a part of that child's memories, not, just, oh, I have another test tomorrow and I got to study tonight, and things like that. Or, being so rigid where you have, one day you have, one whole week you have practice test, and then the next week, I remembered you had the test, the real test. So that's 2 weeks, and that's awful. And when I taught little children, I mean, I really felt sorry for them. And it began to show when I would walk around. I wasn't going to help any child with the answers, but I'd walk around and some were doodling, you know. And I'd say, please try. And then they would be drawing a picture on the side. You're not supposed to draw a picture in the testing booklet, things like that. I knew they were frustrated.
So we just have a couple minutes left. Would either one of you like to give information about this press conference, which is a multi-community, it's the labor, it's the community folks, it's parents. It's happening tomorrow.
Well, what I know is that it will be at the Coverdale building across from the Capitol, I think on the 5th floor, but I'm not sure, but the guard can help people. It will be at 10:30. And it, like you said, it's a multitude of different organizations and different people who are supporting the opposition of the Opportunity School District, and I think that's just great.
All right, I know both of you belong to some organizations, and there may be some other teachers out there who would like to connect with you or organizations you're with. So Gloria, you want to start?
Well, I'm in the Organization of DeKalb Educators Retired. It's the Organization of DeKalb Educators, but now I'm retired, so we have a little retired group. And we meet every 4th Tuesday at noon. We have lunch downstairs at Maurice's Cafe at the Crescent Center Parkway, on Crescent Center in La Vista, off of La Vista Road. And let's see, Metro Atlantans for Public Schools, MAPS. Both Susan and I are in that organization. We're very concerned about keeping the public in public schools.
Do you belong to something else, Susan, to mention?
Nothing that,
Okay.
that I can add to that.
Oh, I thank both of you very much. I think
Thank
this was a
you.
good
Having us.
conversation.
A lot of wisdom.
Yeah, so listeners, again, this is just, we will be talking about this ballot initiative, not so much just because it's on the ballot, but because of what the impact of it's going to be. And as we have had so many programs on this radio station, because the privatization obviously affects workers at every institution and every agency where profit and where the bottom line becomes first and not service to the public. So we encourage you to really think hard about the kind of information that's being given by business, promoting business methods on things like education. Well, I thank you very much.
Can I just say something? I think that we're going to be barraged with very slick advertising from outside sources to push this through.
Lots
So
of money.
please don't be persuaded by that.
Well, please do look at the information. It's really important that we can see through dodgy stuff. All right, so this is the Labor Forum team of Paul McLennan and Diane Math. Let's say bye for now. We want to thank our engineer, Christopher, and our videographer, Ozzy. And we'll see you again next Monday.